explores the story of a biting British satire and a glimpse at post-war life. I'm All Right, Jack. New now on Sky Arts.
Be confident. Express yourself verbally and visually. Your design ideas are great.
Invaluable advice. Sky Arts, sponsored by St James's Place.
We haven't had a stoppage like this for ages. Not since the week before last. Terribly sorry about it. Oh, you don't want to be sorry, Squire. Makes a nice little break, doesn't it? What's up now? Dinner time. Come on, cook. Blimey. All go today, innit?
Released in 1959, I'm All Right, Jack went to the top of the British box office. A film that spoke to its times and gazed suspiciously into the future. Beneath the laughter lies a provocative study of politics, class, aspiration, greed and division. A vision that, chillingly, still holds true over 60 years later.
There's a lot of British comedy in that era, which is very funny, but it's very parochial. You know, it'll usually be about a jewel robbery or sort of some people in prison or robbing a bank or something. Whereas I'm All Right, Jack, right from the first frame, is very much setting itself out as being a state-of-the-nation film. It's a very ambitious film. It's making a big, bold statement about British society since the war.
Hey, you! What do you think you're doing?
Frightfully sorry. I'm afraid I haven't quite got this thing buttoned up yet.
What's your name?
Windrush.
The permanently bewildered Ian Carmichael makes for a splendid patsy as Stanley Windrush, the posh twit who has landed on the factory floor, a pawn both for the self-important union and the scheming bosses. But the movie belongs to Sellers. What makes Kite so memorable is that he rises above caricature. He is an idealist, even a romantic, trapped in his dreams of classless equality and a truculent, very British devotion to the rules.
Look hard, for this is the last we shall see of Sir John. A justice of the peace, chairman of the Rotten Unionist Association, vice president of his local British Legion, honorary chairman of the regional board for the adjustment of distressed gentlewomen, and sleeping partner in that vast financial complex, the City and Threadneedle Trust. Yes, there goes Sir John. A solid block in the edifice of what seemed to be an ordered and stable society. There he goes, on his way out. For with victory came a new age, and with that new age, a new spirit.
I'm all right, Jack, I'm okay. That is the message for today.
The film is filled with British greats, not only Sellers and Carmichael, but Terry Thomas, Dennis Price, Richard Attenborough, Irene Handel, and Margaret Rutherford. It was directed by the versatile John Boulting and produced by his twin, Roy, the brothers behind Brighton Rock.
I'm All Right, Jack is a social satire where, possibly for the first time in British cinema, the filmmakers were looking to really go into detail about the trade union movement and its relationship with management. This hadn't really been done before. There had been a number of films about, for instance, class conflict between the ranks in the army and the upper classes in the army, or there's been street-based sequences with class. But the idea of moving it into the workplace and examining workplace tensions was actually revolutionary. It was also accurate. The people who made this film wanted to create a realistic comedy with over-the-top satirical characters, this beginning of the challenging and understanding and reinterpretation of British institutions. It's a revolutionary piece of work in many ways, and it changed the way that comedy was made. A lot of the archetypes we see in this film go on to become strong archetypes in British comedy throughout the 60s, 70s and onwards. So they wanted to draw out what was happening, but also make a much broader statement about the structure of the society. It's a commentary as much as a joke.
Mr. Hill, are you any nearer a settlement with the employers today than you were yesterday?
No, the fight is on. There's no prospect, as we see it, of a settlement being reached. And this great assembly here today proves conclusively that the spirit of the workers is solid and determined to win this great struggle. Do you think?
It's really, at heart, it's a class comedy. It's about the management and the workers, with Windrush's aunt as even above that, the sort of upper class. And it's very heavily built around the sort of stock characters, the sort of devious boss, the union leader who constantly uses slightly too long words that he doesn't quite know what they mean. They're all from a gallery of British characters. You can imagine them all in cartoons, newspaper cartoons, and you'd recognise them instantly. The boss with the moustache, the slightly dodgy ex-military type, the workers constantly having tea breaks. They all feel like a familiar gallery of British life.
That's all right for the brass at head office. They don't actually have to deal with the workers. As personnel officer, that's my job. God help me. I can tell you they're an absolute shower. A positive shower.
But my instructions, Major Hitchcock, are to carry out a time and motion study in every department.
Whose bright idea was that?
There's absolutely no question that the Boulting Brothers took the baton of Michael Balkan's Ealing Studios comedies and ran with it into the next era. The Ealing comedies, of course, characterized by wonderfully cosy armchair anarchy, but an anarchy it was, anti-establishment comedies that, of course, stood the test of time. The Boultings took that anarchy and just made it more jaundiced. They had a more jaundiced view of society by the time that they got round to making their great comedies. One of the reasons is that their own experiences in filmmaking up to that point was that they'd come across all kinds of difficulties involving unions, communist infiltration, management problems, all sorts of things like that, which actually had turned them slightly politically. And so they had a pretty sort of bitter view of the industry as well as British society. And they were objective enough to be able to sort of see it, but clever enough to know that if they wanted to get these messages across, they had to be entertaining. So they made a series of comedies which basically targeted the sort of great institutions of Britain, the law, the Foreign Office, but greatest of all, industry and the unions. And that's why I think by the time they got round to making I'm All Right, Jack, they were in the absolute prime of their sort of satirical ideas and how to express them.
Is he in? Ah, good morning, Mr. Kite. Well, he's very busy, but I know he's always pleased to see you. Will you come this way? The Works Committee to see you, Major.
Ah, come in. Take a pew. Cigarette?
After due deliberation, Major Hitchcock, the Works Committee has had to call a stoppage in response to our members' wishes.
Oh, really? Oh, what precisely is the trouble?
The reference they made, I'm All Right, Jack, was a piece of military slang, and it is supposed to have begun in the Second World War as a sort of a naval term for when you're abandoning your ship and you pull the ladder up after you, shouting to the men below, "Sod you, I'm all right, Jack." It was this idea of, at a moment of crisis, the person who decides that they're for themselves and they're not for the collective. What the filmmakers wanted to show is the attitude of looking out for number one, looking after only yourself, is permeating British society. And so everybody in this film, with the exception of one person, is making sure that they're all right.
There are numerous candidates for Peter Sellers' finest performance. The great actor-comedian was a chameleon, disappearing inside the skin of his characters. But the answer is simple. Fred Kite, shop steward of Missiles Limited, the factory at the heart of I'm All Right, Jack. Not only a razor-sharp political satire, but an indelible slice of post-war British life.
My colleagues here have instructed me to put to you one question, Major.
Certainly. Go ahead, my dear fellow.
Is it or is it not your intention to sack this man?
Sack him, of course.
Invaluable advice. Sky Arts, sponsored by St James's Place. Invaluable advice. Sky Arts, sponsored by St James's Place.
I'm obliged to point out, Major, that if you sack this man, the company is in breach of its agreement with the union.
Surely he's not a union member.
Correct, but that is merely technical.
But didn't you say that he was incompetent and couldn't do his job properly?
We do not and cannot accept the principle that incompetence justifies dismissal. That is victimization.
That's right. Get here.
I'm All Right, Jack was born out of a rich comedy heritage. The Ealing tradition was drawing to a close in 1959, but it had bequeathed the concept of social inquiry into a new generation of films. Based on the novel Private Life by Alan Hackney, this is technically a sequel to Private's Progress, made by John Boulting in 1956. In that wartime satire, Ian Carmichael's lollygagging Windrush proves himself to be less than officer material.
One of the things that is interesting about it is that officially it was a sequel to a film called Private's Progress, and it shares a lot of the same characters. But the thing about Private's Progress was that it was looking back to the war, set in the war, whereas I'm All Right, Jack, in a way, is looking forward to the next 20 years of British life. Because that way of being, in constant strikes and industrial relations and unions arguing, that went on for another 20 years. That went on right up until 1979, when Margaret Thatcher was elected, specifically to put a stop to the kind of world of I'm All Right, Jack. So weirdly, it's almost a look ahead to the future, as well as being a look at Britain now, i.e. in 1959.
We're now putting beside the Ford's assembly line. In the normal way, we wouldn't be able to shoot here because of the terrific noise of machinery, which, as you can see, is now stopped and dead. Now, this is Colonel Buckmaster, who is the public relations officer. Colonel Buckmaster, can you tell me how long the lines have been stopped?
Yes, since last night.
Be, sir, before the stoppage extends to the rest of the plant.
Well, I'm afraid that'll be tomorrow.
How many men will that lay off?
Approximately 15,000.
How official is this strike on the part of the Briggs bodies men?
Well, it's completely unofficial. The first the management heard of it was at lunchtime yesterday, when men went out to lunch and didn't come back again, which caused, of course, the slowdown and eventually the stoppage of the whole plant because there was no work for the others to do.
I'm All Right, Jack picks up with the demobbed Ian Carmichael's attempts to join the upswing of post-war Britain in the 50s. Skewering both political and working life, the sequel follows rival arms factories scheming to raise the profit margin on a deal to sell missiles to the Middle East. A plan that will involve fomenting a strike around the issue of time management.
Well, Mr. Mohammed, I'm afraid there's a distinct possibility that missiles will be unable to fulfill your contract.
But you are joking. The peace of the Middle East depends on it.
Oh, no, my dear fellow, I'm not joking. Cox, perhaps you'll explain to Mr. Mohammed.
Well, there's an engineering concern that I happen to own. I own the shares, and Bertie owns the tax losses. Only they're not in his name, of course.
The Britain that I'm All Right, Jack depicts is one that has emerged, in a sense, from the darkest shadow of the war. And indeed, people, whilst they have, all the people in this film will have, the characters in this film will have served in the war, they don't discuss it. It's something that happened in the past, much as the country had left that behind. The country is battling with a number of different things. On the one hand, consumer culture, teenagers coming up with listening to rock and roll. This whole sort of new Britain is beginning to emerge on the streets. On the other hand, Britain is trying to understand its place in the world. So by the time the film had come out, we had just had the Suez Crisis, where Britain had tried to exert its old imperial power and failed dismally. So there was a sense that the old country, the old muscle that Britain had internationally, was decaying. And at the same time, the society itself was changing. So there's a sense of grasping for what actually is this country, what's the tradition that we still have, where are we going with this, who can we trust? And the film really comes to the conclusion that everybody's on the make now. The consumer society offers opportunities to make a quick buck selling fast goods, or, for instance, in the case of Am I Right, Jack, to sell weapons overseas, literally to our former enemies. They're selling missiles to someone who is clearly a reference to an Egyptian army officer. So post-Suez, the factory in question is selling missiles to the Egyptians. And there's this sense that the country is recovering from its post-war bankruptcy by selling everything it can all the time, and really without a sense of identity or pride that it's trying to grasp at.
Handed a job by his unscrupulous Uncle Bertram and oily Dennis Price, Carmichael's bumbling Windrush will be thrown onto the factory floor, essentially to stir up trouble. But the comic twist is that he will be ostracised by both sides, because he proves to be too good at his job of driving a forklift truck. He begins as a fool and emerges as the voice of reason.
What the hell do you think you're doing?
Shut that bleeding door!
Go on, get off out of it, will you?
I do beg your pardon. I'm new here.
I should very well think you are. And look, you bring those things back here and you get back up the other end. That's where you ought to be.
You bet. I don't know, they're taking on some proper Charlies nowadays, aren't they? Hey? Right, here we go again.
I find that really funny because that's so true, you know, that thing. You only have to look at British politics in the last few years, that the idea that you can drift out of Oxford and do anything, even if you have no experience in it and no particular aptitude for it, is a mistake that we still make today. And those are really funny scenes at the beginning, I think, when the character of Windrush, one of the things that's so funny about him is that he's completely oblivious to how rubbish he is. You know, he genuinely thinks that there's nothing to these jobs, that you can just turn up and just do them. It's funny because it reminds me of David Cameron, who was asked why did he want to become Prime Minister, and he said, because I thought I'd be rather good at it. And that's precisely what Windrush would say. You know, why do you want to work for this detergent company? Oh, I thought I'd be rather good at it.
The brothers John and Roy Boulting, who alternated being director and producer, were committed liberals. They mixed drama, including the Great Brighton Rock, with telling satires of British institutions such as the academia of Lucky Jim or the diplomatic circles of Carlton Brown of the FO. With I'm All Right, Jack, they paint a cynical picture of 1959. Across the spectrum of British life, there was a fear of escalating strikes, even of revolution from below, and of manipulation and corruption from above.
Roy tended to be the producer in many films, and John tended to be the director. However, that is not exclusive. They were almost interchangeable in a ways that some of the actors, I think it was Terry Thomas actually said, you know, if Roy took off his glasses, you had absolutely no idea who you were talking to. It was only the glasses that actually they could distinguish one from the other. And they had the same sort of ideas. They were completely interchangeable, and they worked brilliantly together because they understood film, they understood the techniques that they were using, and they also understood that they were looking at society in a way that perhaps hadn't been done before. They had, strangely enough, they evolved in the same way too, in terms of moving from perhaps the left politically a little bit more to the right, just as a result of their joint experiences. And it's because they had experiences together that they actually carried on evolving together almost as one unit.
As they moved into the 1950s, they started using comedy to make their point. So they would take jabs at British institutions. For instance, they had a film, Carlton Brown of the FO, which was mocking British foreign policy and the civil service. But they always rooted it in that idea of showing real life. They used location shooting as much as possible. They wanted to anchor their stories in a very real world. The comedies would also have a strong satirical edge, and sometimes they would push the comedy out into the almost fantastical, not quite fantastical as in a dream sequences, but in terms of the plot. They would exaggerate the plots, really to make the point. It was, reducto ad absurdum. They would get to the point where they lionized a particular institution to the point where it seemed ridiculous. In the case of I'm All Right, Jack, for instance, they used mock industrial adverts saying how wonderful British industry was, which were very accurate depictions of those industrial adverts at the time. British industry makes great strides. And then they would juxtapose that with the real nature of a British factory. So reality, illusion, comedy, satire, these all merged together in a sequence of excellent films.
I'm now nearing the end of my journey. I hope I still have some services to render.
But in 1955, the advance of time did to Churchill what dictators' armies and warplanes had failed to do. He chose to surrender. Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip attended a formal dinner party at the venerable statesman's residence at 10 Downing Street. Sir Winston had announced retirement at the age of 81. An inspirational life of public service that had spanned the reigns of Victoria and Elizabeth was now at an end.
This is a changing Britain under the satirical microscope. The old empire has gone with the war, and the upper classes are plotting to hold on to the money. However, inspired by the distant call of Karl Marx, the workers are putting up a fight.
Very good. Dirty beast.
Invaluable Advice. Sky Arts, sponsored by St James's Place. Invaluable Advice. Sky Arts, sponsored by St James's Place.
She's mine, oh mine. All you fellas keep out, beware, stay away. She's my baby now, and that's the way she'll stay.
Yes, here's another good one to start on. Collective childhood and factory manhood.
Oh, sounds fun.
Yeah, very descriptive. It's all about how they run factories in a workers' state. However, I won't spoil it for you.
You ever been to Russia, Mr. Kite?
No, not yet. It's the one place I'd like to go to, though. All them cornfields and Bali in the evening.
I wish I knew as much about it as you do.
Ian Carmichael's Windrush is a candide figure, pulled by each side, oblivious to politics, immune to the class struggle. He just wants to find his place in the world, and in a sense represents the emerging British middle class. He is also a parody of the angry young man of the 50s, finally stirred into denouncing all sides of the argument, though no one listens.
Dad, tell Mum I'll be in late tonight, will you?
Very well, Cynthia. You on overtime, are you?
Don't be daft. Going up west. Dancing.
My daughter, Cynthia, works here spindle polishing.
Really? Quite a job.
Because he has no idea what's going on, he is sort of used and abused by both the top brass, the management, and the union workers. Although, strangely enough, he develops quite an interesting relationship with Peter Sellers' Fred Kite. Fred Kite is one of Peter Sellers' greatest achievements as an actor. In fact, it's his first great achievement as a fully fledged actor as opposed to just a comic actor. He didn't originally want to play this role. He was rather reluctant. He'd done a film with the Boulting Brothers before. He said he's got a small role in Carlton Brown of the FO. And when he was given the script for I'm All Right, Jack, he didn't think it was funny. It took all of the Boulting Brothers' sort of powers of diplomacy to persuade him that this was going to be funny. It was a fairly sketchy character in the original script. And they said, but they gave him carte blanche to create the character. And Sellers went right into deep research. He started looking at newsreels of union leaders, not just here, but in the Soviet Union. He started thinking about how the guy would walk, how he would talk, what his language would be, how he would dress. And basically, Sellers is responsible for the character that then emerged on the screen that has become synonymous with the kind of petty Napoleonic union leader or a shop steward, as we say, who thinks of himself as vitally important, is an incredibly pompous little man, and yet has power. He does have power because he can actually call a strike at any time he wants to.
Mr. Stevens, you're the chairman of the Shop Stewards Committee. You've decided today not to go back to work on Monday. Why is that?
Well, the feeling by the mass of the workers on an amendment to our resolution as a strike committee, now a resolution being to return to work on Monday, the workers are so incensed, they're so incensed by the fact that they're not prepared to accept such intolerable conditions that are being placed upon them. They are prepared to struggle until they get certain assurances from the Ford Motor Company.
Yes.
Thank you, brother. Right, brothers, are we all gathered? My purpose in convening you is to lay before you certain facts. A few minutes ago, I was handed this paper by a representative of the management. It purports to contain certain timings made by the management which directly affect the rates for the job that you're doing. Now, this is the first time that this has been mooted to the Works Committee, and everything about it constitutes quite definitely, a definite breach of the existing agreements that exist between management and unions.
A diabolical liberty.
But it is Peter Sellers who makes the film. Like nothing he had ever done before, Kite hints at something real. With his short back and sides and toothbrush moustache, a chaplain of the factory floor, Sellers is meticulous in his creation of character. Kite is gloriously humorless and therefore very funny. There is an air of tragic pretense about it. He calls for a Marxist utopia on a British industrial estate, but at heart yearns simply for importance.
The film begins with a Peter Sellers sort of elaborate colonel character in a club, an old fusty club, and this in a way represents the old Britain, and then appears much later as a trade union official from the New World, living a very particular modern kind of life. So Sellers, if you like, represents the flip. He flips in the way that that society is flipping, and I think there's something significant in that choice. The Boulting Brothers made a deliberate example of this one person flipping from one character to another, and therefore demonstrating the way the world is changing.
You ever read any of Lenin's works, have you?
No, I'm afraid I haven't.
That'll open your eyes for you.
Is he still on about Russia? I'll tell you straight. That's all we ever get to hear in this house.
The thing that we must mention is, of course, that Fred Kite is obsessed with the Soviet Union. He's obsessed with Russia, all things Russian. He calls, he doesn't ever refer to himself as a communist. He says, because, my politics are between my conscience and the ballot box. But he's obviously, in his heart, he's a communist. But he's got a sort of strange grasp of what it is to be in the Soviet Union. And he sort of dreams of this place where, full of cornfields, and then there's ballet in the evening. You can see that the man is deluded, although he's not malicious, he's not cruel, he's just sort of power crazed and completely deluded.
The Boultings are taking a swipe at everyone. Kite's workers are hardly heroic, including such familiar comedy figures as Terry Scott, Kenneth Griffith and Victor Madden. They are portrayed as work-shy and devious, as equally the target of the smug meaning behind the title, I'm All Right, Jack, as their self-serving bosses.
One of the delights of the film is there's a whole gallery of British comedy actors who all worked together before. Boulting Brothers know them, and they're able to cast them in roles that they just inhabit without even thinking about it. You have Terry Thomas as the sort of personnel manager who's kind of the liaison between the management and the workers. He has no respect for the workers, obviously, whatsoever, and very quickly delineates them as shower. There's some shower. And he recognises Windrush, of course, immediately sees his name on the card. He was a stinker in the army, and he's a stinker now. But he doesn't really have much respect for the management either. So when he realises that what they're trying to do with Windrush, he's got this expression of sort of, oh crikey, you really don't know what you're getting into, do you? There's John Le Mesurier as a very 50s thing called Time and Motion Man, which is sort of in a way a forerunner of management consultancy. He's essentially there to tell the company how they can make their systems more efficient. So he's constantly hated by everybody wherever he goes. And as a result, he has this twitch the whole time, which is very funny because you know that he's got this totally thankless job where he's basically there to work out just how lazy the workers are and how the management can make them work harder. And he knows that everyone hates him. And John Le Mesurier has this perfect face for that.
In a lovely ironic subplot, the authoritarian Kite finds himself in thrall to the newfound ideals of his wife, the always delectable Irene Handel. Weary of waiting upon her egalitarian husband hand and foot, she decides to go on strike. While his daughter, Liz Fraser, a factory worker keen on Windrush, will prove another thorn in the side of the great socialist leader.
The film's satirical targets are, in effect, everybody in the UK, the way the country is changing. So everything is held up for mockery. What survived with this film and what perhaps gives this film its reputation is it's one of the first films to pick the trade union movement as an object of mockery and satire. And that's because at this point the trade union movement is part of the establishment in itself. It is a powerful force in the country. When we look at, if we were to make this film now, we would look far more closely at the deals the management are doing. The management are up to the kind of corrupt deals that still feature in films, dodgy arms deals, forcing workers into particular forms of behaviour. But in those days, the idea that the trade unions had a force and a power to play and had their own level of corruption was socially real, it was socially appropriate, and also relatively novel to depict on screen. It had to be depicted carefully because a lot of people in the country, the audience, the people who had paid to go and see this film, would be in workplaces, in trade unions. You had to get it right, get that mockery, that satire spot on. It's easier to lampoon, a foolish former major than it is to make a joke about someone's workmates that they recognise and laugh along with and at.
Opposite Kite and his slovenly workers are the cads and bounders of management. Dennis Price is the untrustworthy factory owner Bertram Trace Purcell, while Terry Thomas is the twitchy middle manager Hitchcock. In a rare, rakish turn, Boulting favourite Richard Attenborough has a whale of a time as Sidney de Vere Cox, head of the rival factory, in cahoots with Bertram.
Where do you think you're going?
On strike, Gov.
On strike? What you on strike for?
In sympathy with missiles.
Sympathy? What about a bit of sympathy from me?
Excuse me, Mr.
Ah, shut up!
Invaluable advice. Sky Arts, sponsored by St James's Place.
Maya was just settling down to some mindless scrolling when...
Remember this? Can't believe we didn't always wear sun cream.
I know, right? We were too busy having fun.
Number 7's Future Renew Serum, clinically proven to reverse visible signs of sun damage with a world-first peptide technology. Save £10 when you spend £20 on Number 7 Future Renew at Boots.
We all live different lives, which is why at Toyota, we have a vehicle to suit everyone. Whether hybrid, plug-in hybrid, hydrogen, or all electric, at Toyota, every choice counts.
What a wonderful day! I can make your hands clap. Said I can make your hands clap. Said I can make your hands clap.
Do you prefer digital currency for this exchange?
Have a fiver?
No, it's crypto only, mate.
What a load of malarkey. We keep things simple. Less malarkey, more smarty. Search Smarty Mobile.
Laptop rage. I'll handle this. Try Copilot in Windows to find facts fast. Perfect on a speedy HP Pavilion powered by Intel Core processors.
Thank you, Curry's man.
Cure laptop rage from £15 4p a month. Curry's, beyond expectations.
Which would you choose? This exercise bike or this one? From Woucher. Woucher. Save now. Live wow.
This Morrison's baby event. Get adorable offers like Pampers, nappies and pants for better than half price. £11 down to £4.50.
Morrison's to shop at Morrison's.
Why should I be framed? Able advice. Sky Arts, sponsored by St James's Place.
I don't know what that lot suddenly turned up for. They won't see nothing. The strike's solid.
Why don't you tell them to photograph something worthwhile? Hello? What's he come here for?
Set in an unnamed British city, the exteriors of Missiles Limited were filmed at the Flexolo factory in Slough and the interiors at Shepperton Studios. It could be described as docudrama or indeed docu-comedy in style. But there is great visual contrast between the factory yard, the mundane management offices, and the plush clubs where the plotting is done.
The fact that the film is set in a missile factory is critical, although understated. It features as a subplot, but the driving subplot. It's the idea that moves the whole film forward. What it's also showing is that Britain is no longer portraying itself as a military power that can exert force. It's now a military trader. It sells weapons. And in this case, it's selling weapons to the Egyptian. Of course, this is just after the Suez Crisis, where British troops and Egyptian troops had exchanged fire. So we are now selling a missile to the Egyptian army who, for all intents and purposes, who knew it could be used against British troops at some point in the future. That's the way we do business these days.
An agent provocateur, that's what you are.
No, Mr. Kite.
You whited sepulchre, you. Talked your way in the Union, wormed your way into my house, and all the time you was a fifth column in our midst.
I didn't mean to upset you like this, Mr. Kite. Do you mind if I drive on into the factory?
Oh, no, you don't.
Come on,
All right, go on in if you're going. You filthy traitor, Whitworth!
What the bosses are trying to do is exploit Ian Carmichael's incompetence, Windrush's incompetence for their own ends. And in fact, it backfires on them because his incompetence creates this sort of accidental whistleblower who then, after a while, becomes a national hero. He is the one who eventually turns up at the factory gates in a bubble car, no less. And the bubble car, of course, was emblematic of the new era of the 1960s. I mean, you know, a proper bubble car too, not a Messerschmitt one, which was kind of, you know, just incredible. It was the next one was the Mini, you know, but this is before the Mini. So he's already sort of looking ahead, and he walks in and says, "I've got to work," and he becomes sent to Coventry, and he becomes a national hero, and that gives him the power, in a funny sort of way, although he doesn't realise it, to actually change things.
With gratitude for your fight against the rising cost of living, this gift comes to you from 5 Cheltenham ladies living on fixed incomes. How very kind, Stanley.
Jolly kind indeed, Aunt.
Just listen to all that cheering.
How long have they been there, Aunt Dolly?
Hours, dear. What a nation we British are once we are stirred. Children of Babylon are destroyed and become an abomination in the eyes of lascivious ones.
Three cheers for Mr. Churchill and Stanley Windrush. Hip hip hooray! Hip hip hooray! Hip hip hooray!
The two big sides in this film are the management and the workers. Although around this, the Boulting Brothers put the government, they put the media, they mock tabloid press, you know, they mock the way that the country sees this conflict. But the real conflict is between management and the workers. Now, if you look at the script and you look at who is mocked and what they're mocked for, both sides are equally venal, equally silly. What Peter Sellers brought to Kite was so strong and so influential and so recognisable that became the standout role from the film. And so in a way it was seen, it's become an example of a joke about trade unionism. But really, the script doesn't do that. The script is pretty even-handed. It's just the brilliance of Peter Sellers' performance that made people recognise something for the first time, and it became this symbolic gesture about the problems with trade union organisation in the workplace. And that's not really, I don't think, what the Boulting Brothers were intending to do. They very specifically weren't making this an anti-union film. It was the strength of the performance that made people interpret it that way.
As the strike escalates to a nationwide scale, Windrush will be invited onto a television discussion programme called Argument, hosted by the actual Malcolm Muggeridge. As Windrush plaintively calls for sense, the programme, and by association Britain, descends into total chaos. The film causes stir on its release. The left-wing press saw it as an attack on the union movement, while the right-wing papers declared it as anti-establishment. They were right on both counts, and it became the #1 film of 1959. Though more broadly comic, here were the early stirrings of the British New Wave.
It's difficult to say how much I'm All Right, Jack still means to Britain in terms of the 21st century, where we are. Certainly as a snapshot of its era, it is vitally significant, no question about that. Not just in terms of the relationships between various parties involved here, but also just in the way of looking at the locations. I mean, it's a snapshot of a sort of lost landscape. Essential problems, which are, yes, industrial relations, but beyond that, human venality and greed are still with us. Of course, they'll always be with us. People will always be looking to find, you know, the next opportunity to make a fast buck. The only thing that's different is, of course, you know that there are many, many, many more zeros on the end of the check.
I'm All Right, Jack is both a historical political document and, terrifyingly, a very relevant political critique of the way that Britain is trying to make its way in the world. This is a film that says to the audience, at the end of the Second World War, we don't really know how to build our own consumer culture. We don't know how to exert our, military power. The idea of a useless missile company is something that you could make today. I mean, that submarines firing off missiles that don't work is very much a part of the British news today. Governments walking out of debates and falling out on television, this is very much a part of today. There's almost nothing in this film that isn't about now and then. It joins together these two moments, and both of these ideas are about a country that's losing its way in the world, a country that's trying to understand, after an enormous history as one particular kind of country. Still, I feel, the country hasn't come to terms with what happened in the 1950s and the after effects of that. We're still groping for a particular sense of identity, and the comedy in that is very easy to find. And what the Boulting Brothers note and do very, very subtly is that there's also a deep, deep tragedy to it.
I think the film really sets itself out as a document of post-war Britain. I think it does it very deliberately right from the start. The jokes in the film are on all levels. There are very sort of clever verbal jokes, particularly from Fred Kite. But there's also some really broad visual comedy, such as the moment when Ian Carmichael has been forced to eat so many num-yum samples that he's now feeling sick. And the big machine which produces the num-yum stuff is designed in the shape of two big eyes and a big mouth. And just at the moment he totters off the screen to be sick, the machine disgorges a load of num-yum fluid, which is very, very clearly designed to look like the machine is being sick. And it's a really, really big, childish joke and really funny.
Boil it down, and I'm All Right, Jack is about the central political divide of post-war Britain between socialism and conservatism, or the working class and the upper class, with the emerging middle class caught between. It is a film that spoke to its era, but what is so telling is that everything the Boultings took to task in 1959 remains relevant today. It was a premonition of a future where nothing has changed.
Oh, go on, be a sport. I bet you're jolly good.
Oh, come on, Stanley.
None of us are terribly hot, you know.
I wouldn't be any good, honestly.
Rubbish, he's only just being modest. Come on, you ladies, come and make him play.
Oh, no! No, harder.
A modern masterpiece about